interpreted sick in all its forms. There were some really interesting contributions on nature prescriptions, natural playgrounds, and urban gardening as therapy at local levels, right up to how smart city approaches can plan for regreening with public health at the forefront at a whole city scale. So we interpreted sick in all its varieties and health in all its aspects. It was also very clear that incorporating nature-based solutions, the nature-based solution approach into education is well underway, and long may that continue. Just something to bear in mind as we go into the last day and contemplate the importance of innovating with nature-based solutions. We know that we need to increase the size of global cities or cities globally by about 30% in order to accommodate the projected population by 2100. So if you think about it, 30% of our future cities are not yet built. Therefore, the necessity for green spaces, green growth, and innovating with nature-based solutions is even more critical. And we're at a really opportune time to kick this ball rolling, start it rolling, and get this underway. Yesterday, we also heard about the importance of measuring impact at all times, as well as the imperative for ongoing monitoring and evaluation, which is still something that almost all cities have yet to implement fully or to commit to implementing. There were some fantastic examples of innovative and novel interventions for converting spaces of, for example, conflict into to spaces of natural regeneration. Regeneration, all definitions of that word. From Pavalos Melos, we heard about the conversion of military establishments into nature-based parkland, right through to a highly innovative Sarajevo process that was tested in Sarajevo and Nicosia last year, and which has the potential for building community cohesion through the engagement with nature. On top of that, we saw how innovative business models can bring creative potential to establish business communities and therefore opening up new avenues for investing in nature, especially in cities. Wonderful stuff altogether. Today, we continue the dialogue on the green economy, or as Siobhan, who you'll be hearing from later, calls it the nature-based economy. I like this term, and I feel we should start to use it more frequently and more freely, because it clarifies what we mean by regreening the economy. Incorporating the natural capital approach into the nature-based solution mainstreaming approach means that we are transitioning into a nature-based economy. At least we want to transition into a nature-based economy. And this gives us a vision. This might give us a vision of what the face of sustainable living really can look like. So we are at a very critical point, and this is the prime opportunity for mainstreaming the nature-based, or for incorporating the nature-based economy into everyday discourse. Today, we look at recovery. To start with, we continue where we finished yesterday with our global hubs and the UrbanbyNature program for capacity building. Following this, we dig our teeth into the Green Deal and the green economy. And we round off the morning with Siobhan leading the discussion on the nature-based economy that I mentioned earlier. After which, we hear from some SMEs or nature-based enterprises who are now working with and delivering nature-based solutions through innovative processes. Also today, we have built in a lot of networking breaks into the program. A lot of people have commented about how they've made quite a few new contacts in the networking space, and it seems that a lot of you really enjoy using it, and it's been quite intuitive and relaxing, actually. And I'm pleased to inform you also that some of our own team have established new connections as well, so Connecting Nature has benefited greatly by this. So when we have a break, stretch your legs, grab a coffee or tea, and drop by for a chat and maybe introduce yourself to new people and tell us about what you're doing. Finally, just to remind you, you can send a message to COP26 in the Expo area, as I mentioned yesterday. And in addition, I'm going to say this again, you might wish to visit the Connecting Nature social media pages, whichever platform you favor, and keep up to date with the progress of the innovations that you've heard and you will be hearing about today, as well as some new findings, guidebooks, and events and happenings in the nature-based arena globally. We're always interested in hearing from you, so feel free to get in touch. Now, in a few minutes, our colleagues from ICLE will be joining us, and we'll be continuing and talking about the global program that for connecting nature called UrbanbyNature. So, I'd like to extend a very warm Scottish and Irish welcome to or good evening, I should say, Iowa, to all those of you who are joining us now from China, Korea, the Caucasus, as well as those in the near, middle, and far east this morning or this evening. Many of whom have been participating in the UrbanbyNature capacity building program in the past, and others who are curious about how this program can help to realize the nature-based solution approach. So I would like to welcome you again and thank you very much for the stimulating and inventive and active discussions over the last few days. And I look forward to hearing more from you. And also, I look forward to hear what new innovations might come from an event like this. Thank you very much.
Good morning and welcome to the session on the New Green Deal. I'm Julie Proctor from Green Space Scotland and I'll be your chair for this session. This morning we'll be exploring whether nature-based solutions and enterprises can deliver for a green recovery, and we'll be looking at how we can finance nature-based solutions. The format for the session is that we're going to hear from 4 speakers with short presentations, and then we'll move on to a short panel discussion. And a little bit of advance warning, we will be crowdsourcing some responses from you as well, so bear that in mind as you're listening to the presentations. We will be recording the session, so it'll be available for you to watch again, and please do raise any comments or questions as you're listening in the chat column. Before we get started, it'd be really interesting just to get a feel for where you are all from. So if you can click onto the poll and select and let us know whether you're in Scotland, UK, Europe, or the rest of the world. That would be really great to hear that. It's always that thing when you ask people, where are you coming in from? And people might tell you, oh, I'm ringing from my kitchen table or from the spare room. You can't tell us that on the poll, but you know, if you are perhaps dialing in from somewhere interesting, if you've taken your laptop outside into a green space, then please do let us know in the chat. That would be lovely to hear. Okay. I don't know how the poll's going. That's one of the bits. I can't see the poll at the moment, but my colleague is going to just let us know how the that's happening on the poll. Okay, I'll leave that for you to see on the screen as that poll is going. And I'll move us on to the introduce the first presentation slot that we've got today. We wanted to start with an overview of policy context in Scotland. But as today is the first day of the pre-election or PERDA period ahead of the Scottish Government elections in May, that meant we weren't able to have anybody from Scottish Government talking with us live today. So I was going to step in and give us a brief overview, just setting the policy context in Scotland in terms of some relatively new policy initiatives which could contribute to supporting investment in nature-based solutions. But then, when the Cabinet Secretary gave her opening address in the first session of the summit on Tuesday morning, she gave a good overview of some of the key policies and funds. So we're going to start the session now listening to a recording of an extract from Aileen Campbell's presentation, and a wee reminder that this was recorded on Tuesday before the pre-election period started. So let's hear now that extract from Aileen Campbell's opening address.
So recovery from this pandemic won't ever be enough if all that ends up happening is reverting back to normal, when that normality has failed too many for too long, and where there seems to have been a tacit acceptance that inequality is somehow inevitable. There is a chance now to start to do things differently, to embrace the positive change that we've seen and to build forward with activity to rebalance our economy and refocus on what matters, with people and good quality green places at its heart. We should seek to ensure our recovery is green. Focus has rightly been placed on the impact of COVID, but the climate emergency has never left us. Therefore, we should use this moment to build from the much more heightened awareness and appreciation of the environment around us and the well-being that green space and nature brings. And as we move to recovery, the restorative power of nature should not be ignored as part of the healing that we all need to do. That is why, through our programme for government, we've committed to supporting 20-minute neighbourhoods, where people can meet their needs within a 20-minute walk from home, including access to green space, enabling people to live better, healthier lives, and supporting our net zero ambitions. And in Housing to 2040, our 20-year housing strategy, we have a focus on the delivery of new affordable homes, but we also recognise the need to also create great places and spaces for people to live, grow and play in. The last year's experience has taught us just how important and crucial it is to get that right. Scottish Government respects the role of nature-based solutions and the multifunctional benefits they can offer. National infrastructure is already integrated in many of our infrastructure programmes such as housing and regeneration, flood, water and drainage management and active travel. We've made some significant injections of funding to support it. Our infrastructure investment plan sets out a long-term vision of infrastructure in Scotland which supports an inclusive net zero carbon economy and includes details on over £26 billion of major projects and large programmes. With overwhelming support through our earlier consultation, we now have the widest definition of infrastructure in the UK and many parts of the world that includes natural infrastructure. This means we can take a more holistic view of our infrastructure assets and recognise the wider contribution that nature can have in creating sustainable places, reducing emissions and improving well-being. These complement our investments of almost £9 billion for environmental sustainability and the transition to net zero emissions. This includes £2 billion dedicated to tackling climate change through our low carbon fund, which provides support for woodland creation, peatland restoration and the reuse of vacant and derelict land. All of these are critical to delivering the infrastructure needed for our transition to net zero by 2045. Our statement of intent for biodiversity sets the direction for a new biodiversity strategy which will respond to the increasing urgency for action to tackle the twin challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. It highlights the benefit of nature-based solutions such as woodland restoration and creation, peatland restoration and urban green infrastructure for people and nature. And that's why we've committed £250 million over 10 years on peatland restoration and an additional £150 million over the next 5 years in forestry. We're also committed to realising the potential of tiny forests in Scotland, which can support biodiversity and improve urban green space for local communities. We've also welcomed the Vacant and Derelict Lands Task Force recommendations and will work with the Scottish Land Commission and other stakeholders to develop proposals to help deliver a culture change in Scotland's approach to vacant and derelict land. As part of that, I am pleased to announce from this week our new £50 million low carbon vacant and derelict land investment programme is open to applications for funding. This programme will help with tackling persistent vacant and derelict land, delivering regeneration and supporting a green recovery, in turn promoting social justice and well-being across Scotland, especially in more disadvantaged areas. And given the flourishing of our communities as they rolled up their sleeves during the last year to look after each other, it's right that we continue to empower them to support their efforts to tackle climate change. That's why we've committed to developing a network of climate action towns that will exploit the co-benefits of climate action, empowering communities to develop greener, healthier, more livable places, whilst contributing to Scotland's response to the global climate and ecological emergencies. We're also working on the next National Planning Framework, NPF4. It's Scotland's spatial plan and will include a review of our planning policy. And some of the most significant policy changes we expect to explore in developing NPF4 will be expanding green infrastructure and natural places, new policies to promote an infrastructure first approach, including green and blue infrastructure, and support for 20-minute neighbourhoods. The pandemic and the desire for a green recovery has prompted us to rethink our neighbourhoods, our towns, our cities and rural communities, to rethink how we live and to reassess what is important to us. And it's clear that nature-based solutions can offer us a different way of doing things that are sustainable and good for the soul and good for our well-being. To deliver this green, fair and human rights-based recovery, government cannot do it on our own, and that's why it is essential that we work in partnership with empowered communities in order that local approaches and contexts are reflected, and because, quite simply, our communities are the experts in what their needs and their aspirations are. Aristotle said, "In all things of nature there is something of the marvellous," and he's right. We have a chance to rebuild a marvellous future, and empowered communities and nature need to be at its heart. Have a great day.
I think that really sets the scene for how here in Scotland the policy landscape is starting to potentially set out that really fertile ground for delivering nature-based solutions. One opportunity that Elaine didn't mention that I'd just like to highlight, because it's one we're quite interested in seeing, is the new power that was set out in the Planning Scotland Act of 2019. And that's a new power for Scottish ministers to establish an infrastructure levy. That levy would be payable to a local authority in respect of a development within the authority's area, and that income from the levy would be used to contribute to funding infrastructure projects. Where this starts to get really interesting from a nature-based solution perspective is that definition of infrastructure now includes green and blue infrastructure. And as we heard from Elaine, we've now got that wider definition around natural infrastructure. So we're no longer just talking about those big engineering and construction projects when we use the term infrastructure in Scottish policy. Those regulations haven't been developed yet, so it is a case of watch this space, but I think potentially a very welcome resourcing mechanism for the future. So, Catherine has joined us on screen now, and we are going to move now from a national policy level to turn our focus to how do we realise those opportunities in a Glasgow city region. So I'd like to introduce Catherine Pearce from SNIFR, and she's going to talk to us about Climate Ready Clyde's work on identifying opportunities for a post-COVID Green Deal. Over to you, Catherine.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name's Catherine Pearce. I'm Innovation Manager with SNIFR. SNIFR is a sustainability charity with change makers and knowledge brokers to build a society that has greater resilience to climate change. We're also Secretariat to Climate Ready Clyde, which is a regional initiative for Glasgow City region, working with 15 partner organisations to address current and future climate risks and to build our resilience and adaptation. I'm here today to talk about a paper that came from last year, a briefing paper that was produced last summer, looking to the options and priorities for Glasgow City region's response to delivering a green recovery and a Green New Deal post-COVID-19. Obviously, a lot has happened since last summer, but the paper really looked at the possible sort of green recovery and climate resilience options and assessed these against the potential for job creation, economic growth, addressing existing inequalities to really help prioritise types of investment responses. And today I'm going to be focusing on nature-based solutions. A little bit of a background around Clyde Rebuilt. So this was a project led by SNIFR on behalf of Climate Ready Clyde and co-funded by the EU's Climate Innovation Hub, EIT Climate Kick. The work really focused on innovation to catalyse transformational adaptation, recognise the importance of culture to build broader change, and also the need for transformative finance. And it was co-delivered with Climate Kick, SNIFR, Creative Carbon Scotland, who provided their expertise on the nature and role for culture and creative arts and sustainability, and Paul Watkiss Associates, which is a research consultancy with expertise on sort of finance and economics of climate adaptation. So setting the context, Glasgow City region is home to 1/3 of Scotland's population, with a large number of businesses and organisations based here. Latest economic data for Glasgow City region, based on the results of the pandemic, show that overall GDP in Scotland is 7.1% below its level in February of last year, and the numbers of people in the region claiming financial support and benefits due to unemployment has risen by almost 35,000 people since February of last year. The clear need for sort of reprioritisation and reprofiling of public expenditure just generally means that there's less money around, particularly for nature-based solutions. And so for Glasgow City region, this translates into tailoring the green recovery towards its priority needs and sort of regional context. Glasgow City region released its economic recovery plan last December, which really acknowledged the need to build resilience of people to the multiple shocks and stresses, not least COVID, but also climate change, and the need for significant investment in reducing the region's contribution to climate change. It also, as part of a number of different plans and programmes, it focused attention on vacant and derelict land, which is perhaps not surprising. The region's home to 50% of the sites of Scotland's vacant and derelict land register. And the plan recognises that that plan and that attention can create jobs, realise economic benefits, tackle climate change, and improve the health and well-being of local residents. By exploring the potential for that vacant and derelict land, can also focus attention to nature-based solutions as well, particularly in an urban context. In terms of other broader policy context in the area and in the region, Clyde Mission is a partnership between Scottish Government and Glasgow City region to bring together public and private sector partners to harness opportunities and competitive advantage of the River Clyde and the surrounding assets to deliver economic, social and environmental benefits. The mission has sort of 5 integrated, interlinked missions. And within that, those 5 missions, there are a number that offer huge potential, let's say, for exploring nature-based solutions based on the benefits, the broader benefits that they bring. So our paper really recognised that there are a number of different interventions and options that can help a green recovery. And again, just sort of focusing here on the nature-based solutions priority. The first one was around direct investment, so real sort of financial investment to support and finance ecosystem-based flood protection, green spaces, landscape restoration, peatland restoration. A second was around sort of policy and regulatory reform, so that sort of reform to enhance resilience. The third was around capacity building and institutional strengthening. So, where are the skills development programs to support expansion of nature-based solutions and maintenance of natural infrastructure? The fifth was around new financial instruments, and this is where the sort of transformative, innovative finance comes into play, looking at the opportunities for sort of blended finance, leveraging private sector investment, and that's certainly going to be needed if public sector finance is vastly reduced due to the pandemic. And fifthly, around sort of transformation. So really how to look to sort of deeper, more fundamental shifts away from existing systems, whether that be sort of shifts in the planning regime towards urban green transformation, rethinking land use development, rethinking measurement models. So sort of how do we get away from our dependence on GDP, and how to reform government and governance planning and policy. So the paper sort of rated a number of green recovery interventions. And again, I'm going to focus on the nature-based solutions options here. But I think it's perhaps important to note that those nature-based solution options and plans really need to be integrated and part of a wider sort of plan, a wider sort of program. And I'll go into that in a couple of minutes. But we focused on 2 measures specifically here on nature-based solutions. So one was sort of upgrading existing green spaces and ecosystem-based adaptation. In terms of the economic recovery and job creation, so employment, economic multipliers, addressing existing inequalities, very high rating there for, very labour intensive, very high sort of job creation. Medium for both sort of mitigation benefits and climate resilience benefits, but also very high in terms of the sort of further sort of reduced pandemic risk and addressing other civil emergencies and disaster risks. And again, this really plays out the huge sort of co-benefits that nature-based solutions provides. We also looked at new green space, again looking at derelict and vacant land, green spaces, roofs, surface urban drainage systems, and extremely high across all of those 4 ratings. So again, really building an extremely strong case for how nature-based solutions can support a green recovery, and indeed more broadly economic recovery, job creation, and broader sort of societal and health benefits. Just a little sort of touch on the challenges and opportunities. I think there is a tension that when looking at sort of how to crowd in more broadly sort of different elements of finance, different sources of finance, particularly from the private sector. The private sector is really likely only to act when there is the incentive and the financial return to do so. And quite often when we talk about nature-based solutions and sort of more broadly in terms of green recovery options, this is about the sort of classic characteristics of public goods. And private sector find it quite challenging to recognise the incentive and the financial return when public goods are involved. At the same time, though, it's really possible to achieve greater green impact if it's possible to leverage in private finance. The significant amounts of money that are available from private finance mean that programs and nature-based solutions can be really at scale. And finally, public finance is simply not enough on its own. So how to make it happen? Again, nature-based solutions shouldn't sit in a shell, in a silo, really building up a pipeline of projects, package up or bundle up projects and initiatives. So that helps to build that interest and appetite from particularly private sector who really want to invest in big projects and see bigger returns. Build the business case, make it appealing for business, adopt a commercial mindset and explore the potential for revenue. Look to other sources of finance. So how to leverage in sort of private sector finance, how to build sort of innovative and blended models, and how to look to sort of regionally funded support packages for businesses of regional strategic interest. Coordinate with others. So look at that sort of cross-partnership approaches to secure and build a wider range of investment. There's many sort of new and emerging initiatives opening up at the moment. So where are they and how can they be integrated and sort of captured together? So look for the synergies and really sort of integrate nature-based solutions with broader climate resilience measures. And finally, just to sort of raise awareness and promote. There's a very, very strong narrative future for nature-based solutions. And so making sure that benefits are identified and messaging is clear. Just finally to touch on the Glasgow City Region Climate Adaptation Strategy. So this is being developed and designed by Climate Ready Clyde, by the partners and by broader sort of cohort of actors and organisations who have a role to play in building climate resilience across the region. This is soon to be launched, and the strategy has been looking quite strongly at sort of nature-based solutions, about blue-green ecosystems, the role that they play in building our resilience, but also looking at the other side on the sort of finance side of things. So really looking to explore and establish a regional investment pipeline and adaptation finance lab that would really unlock those new investments that are sometimes quite difficult to identify, to reach out to, and to secure. And finally, just my last slide here is really sort of looking at the potential there in the sort of finance innovation. A finance lab that we're looking to establish will provide the sort of help to steer the sort of governance and hope at how to open up that kind of innovation, but essentially really how to reach out and to secure the sort of blended finance, the sort of the green bonds, and all those new sort of models that are out there, particularly with engaging the private sector to make that kind of investment in nature-based solutions more readily available, more appealing, and to really recognise where the revenue and where the return can be gained from some of those nature-based solution projects. So, bit of a whistle-stop tour there, but there's a lot of information in the paper that's on our website, and further information will be available through the adaptation strategy when it's launched, and a number of different papers and resources are on our website. So please have a look there. But many thanks for your time, and look forward to the chat and conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. That was an absolutely fascinating presentation to see the emerging thinking and directions here in the Glasgow city region. We know that resourcing nature-based solutions, particularly at scale, is always a challenge. And innovations typically have been funded by governments, by councils, by municipalities. But as we know, finance is going to get even tighter in that post-COVID recovery world. Attention here and elsewhere is really turning now to private and to corporate finance to look at innovative models, investments and blended models. And as Catherine said there quite clearly, public sector finance on its own is not enough. So with that, I'd like to introduce you now to Joe Pike from the Scottish Wildlife Trust. And Joe is going to talk to us about innovations in financing urban nature-based investments and the route map for the £1 billion Conservation Challenge and opportunities that that offers for nature-based solutions. So thank you, Joe. Over to you.
So thanks very much for inviting me to speak at today's Innovation Summit. It's certainly a timely event, and in the next few minutes, I'd like to offer a few ideas on how we might learn to finance nature-based solutions just as effectively as we've learned to finance things like renewable energy. Basically, the question is, how can we make the green economy greener? So the Scottish Wildlife Trust has been championing nature-based solutions for a number of years, both in our advocacy work, but also practically on our wildlife reserves. And this picture is from Cumbernauld, and it's a great example of an urban nature-based solution where, among other things, a few years ago, we worked with Scottish Water and created a sustainable urban drainage system. That's basically a series of ponds which have provided habitat for all sorts of wildlife, including otters and badgers and a variety of birds and insects, at the same time as improving water quality and reducing flooding. Meanwhile, in Edinburgh, we've been working with the City of Edinburgh Council and a host of other partners on the creation of an ecological coherence plan for the city through a project called the Thriving Green Spaces. This looks at a variety of habitats and the benefits they provide, and is designed to help provide an evidence base to support better decisions and increased investment. And finally, we back in 2018, we also produced a report called Living Cities, and that advocates ecological urbanism, which is an approach to urban planning which puts nature at the centre of the design process in order to create better places and provide solutions to the multiple social, economic and environmental challenges facing 21st century towns and cities. And in that same year, we produced a report called Alive with Nature, working through the Scottish Forum on Natural Capital and Stirling City Council. That looked at the potential economic returns of investing in the city's natural assets as part of discussions connected with the city region deal. It estimated the net present value of a number of interventions over 50 years and calculated an internal rate of return. So if anyone's interested in that, the summary report, which is online, contains a really simple 10-step process that any city or town can use to increase its return on investment. And I'm sure the organisers will be happy to share that link. So I'd like to tell you a little bit this morning about the Scottish Conservation Finance Project and the publication last year of the route map to £1 billion, which was the culmination of a collaborative exercise called the £1 Billion Challenge. Now, the project lasted 2 years. It was led jointly by the Scottish Wildlife Trust and the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, but it had a huge amount of input from all sorts of stakeholders and experts. And it was designed to answer the question, how can Scotland generate the first £1 billion worth of new investment in nature conservation in ways that could also deliver social, economic and financial returns? So this wasn't a fundraising target, it was a call to action inviting people to help Scotland become a place where innovative finance becomes, well, I'll show you here, it crosses this chasm of incomprehension and scale and goes from something mysterious and complex to mainstream and actionable. And in practice, I think that if we develop innovative variations on tried and tested mechanisms, we can help Scotland to meet its commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as bridging the gap between the resources going into nature and climate action and the resources currently available. So the route map itself includes 9 opportunities, such as a Natural Capital Pioneer Fund. You'll see the little icons demonstrate which of the Sustainable Development Goals are most relevant, and in the top right, whether it's at concept stage, active development, or ready to go. There's a Marine Fund, an invasive non-native species loans concept, and more. But today, I'd like to pick out the Nature Climate Bond particularly. Now, some but not all of the innovative financing mechanisms in the route map have the potential to generate a financial return for investors. That's why I've picked this one, but not all of them do. It's a mixture of innovative levies, loans, and investment opportunities. So many of you will be aware that the green bond market has grown stratospherically in recent years. Investors are increasingly looking to finance the transition to a net zero economy, but unfortunately, most of this growth has bypassed biodiversity. And in practice, some of it will almost certainly have harmed biodiversity, simply because biodiversity hasn't been factored into the equation. So the Nature Climate Bond, and this page, which you can't read the text of, but which is from the publication, is a concept that's been developed in discussions between Abundance Investment and the City of Edinburgh Council, with input from the Scottish Wildlife Trust. But let's just start by reminding ourselves what a bond actually is. A bond is basically an IOU. And as an investor, you put in some money, the money gets used for a purpose or purposes, and then sometime later you get your money back with interest. If you don't trust the issuer of the bond to give you your money back, you're very unlikely to invest in the first place. So the issuer needs to be a trusted party like a government. In this case, we're looking at local government. So the issuer of the bond would be a local authority. That means investors would provide the capital for the local authority to use, in this case on nature and climate action, and the local authority would commit to paying back the investors on a defined schedule and at an agreed rate of interest. So before we come onto how that actually works, it's important to understand that the Nature Climate Bond is innovative in 2 ways. First of all, Abundance Investment, which is a UK-based online investment platform, has pioneered a model of crowd-funded bonds, which are cheaper and more straightforward to issue than traditional bonds. They're also far more accessible to ordinary residents and citizens who can invest from as little as £5. So Abundance Investment have been doing this for a while and focusing largely on what we might call traditional green investments, for example, low carbon infrastructure and renewable energy. But the really groundbreaking aspect of the Nature Climate Bond, the concept that was developed as part of the £1 billion challenge, is the focus on biodiversity as well as climate change. And by looking holistically at the benefits of better and more connected green space, combining those with interventions designed to reduce CO2, this bond will tackle these 2 interconnected challenges together, rather than simply delaying action on biodiversity loss until it's too late, and then even more costly to try to rectify. So in terms of how it works in practice, it's not rocket science. We know there's a range of action that can be taken for nature and climate change that will also have economic and financial benefits. Some of these will lead to avoided costs and others will generate income. Some may even do both. So as an example, sustainable urban drainage systems, such as the one I mentioned earlier in Cumbernauld, are a good example of avoided costs, as they can save money on water treatment and avoid costs associated with flooding. By contrast, an income-generating example might be the installation of ground source heat pumps underneath a high-quality biodiverse green space. The heat pumps would provide clean energy that can be sold, while the green space simultaneously provides vital habitat for wildlife. And whether it's through avoided costs or new income streams, in practice, it's probably going to be a combination of both. Cash flows are created that can be used to repay investors over time. And by bundling the nature and climate benefits, it's also possible for some of the interventions to cross-subsidise others. So we can increase the nature climate impact and help meet the growing demand from investors looking to finance the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So you can read through all of the 9 pillars in this document online. From an urban perspective, some of you may also be interested in taking a look at the vacant and derelict land fund concept, which highlights the possibility of turning vacant and derelict urban spaces to productive use through investment in green businesses such as vertical farms. Now, since the publication of the route map in May, the community of Scottish Conservation Finance pioneers, which formed to create the route map, but's grown significantly in number since then, has been really active online, and that's in a space provided by the Scottish Forum on Natural Capital. So if you're interested in conservation finance and would like to join this group, please drop a line to Rory MacLeod, the project officer for the Scottish Forum on Natural Capital, and you'll see Rory's email address on screen here. It's r.macleod@scottishwildlifetrust.org.uk. And I'd like to close with a reference to the recent Dasgupta review, which I'm sure will have been mentioned lots of times already during this important event. And the review highlighted that, quotes, investment in nature-based solutions would help us to address biodiversity loss and significantly contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation, not to mention wider economic benefits. And it makes it very clear that nature is our most precious asset. And I like this picture, which illustrates really simply and powerfully how our economy is embedded in nature and not the other way around. So thanks again for inviting me here today. I wish the best of luck for successful discussions in the remainder of the event, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo, for that really stimulating presentation, which is starting to show us how we're getting closer to realising some of those innovative financing models, particularly with that nature climate bond in Edinburgh, and finding our way of getting across that chasm of incomprehension and scale. That's an image that I'm certainly going to be holding in my mind now. So we've gone from Glasgow city region to Scotland scale. We're now moving out to the European scale. And one of the work streams in the Connecting Nature programme has been exploring financing and resourcing mechanisms. And the session in the summit that follows this one, starting at 11:30, is going to be introducing nature-based enterprises and entrepreneurs. So for our last speaker in this slot, I'd like to introduce Esme from Horizon Newer, and she's going to give us a short introduction to some of the work that's been happening in the Connecting Nature programme around finance and business models and the Enterprise Guidebook. So thank you very much, and over to you, Esme.
Thank you for the introduction, Julie, and good morning, everyone. So my presentation today will be on the financing of nature-based solutions and nature-based entrepreneurship, and it will basically be a very short summary of the research we have been conducting in the Connecting Nature project over the past years. So I'll start with the financing of nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions may be paid for in many different ways, and they're often financed by different sources. And this directly relates to the financing needs of MBS. So we have identified 3 major phases of financing of MBS. And the first phase is the planning of MBS, and this includes the design and the co-creation with stakeholders. The second phase is capital investment of MBS, and this is the actual delivery. And we see that this is over a relative short amount of time, but with a high amount of costs. And the third phase we identify is the ongoing operational costs of nature-based solutions, and this includes the monitoring and maintenance. And of course, the costs here are a bit lower in general, but they are spread over a longer period of time. Also, what we found in the research conducted is there's often a focus on the capital investment cost of nature-based solutions, so mainly the second phase, and that the public sector remains an important source of financing NBS. However, we also found that not enough consideration goes into the planning of long-term sustainable business models for nature-based solutions, and that to secure a return on investment for them. So these sustainable business models are based on go governance and go financing of nature-based solutions. And we see when this is done and when this is taken into account, we see a mix of public and private finance for nature-based solutions. So one of the tools we have developed within the Connecting Nature project for creating sustainable business models for nature-based solutions is this business model canvas. And the key differences between this business model canvas and the conventional one include a focus on the different types of value that are created by nature-based solutions, so environmental, social, and economic value, but also on the governance models. So this business model canvas has been deployed in the 10 Connecting Nature cities, and it was successful in bringing together stakeholders to explore alternative ways of financing and governing nature-based solutions. So with this shift towards alternative financing and governance models, we also see the shift from more of the public sector to the private sector. And this shift is, of course, much needed, as we found that finding skilled and experienced suppliers is a major roadblock for the public sector in the large-scale implementation of nature-based solutions in cities. So for this, collaboration with private and the third sector is needed. We've also found that enterprises can support cities, the private sector, and the third sector in the planning, delivery, and management of nature-based solutions. So these enterprises we call nature-based enterprises, and they use nature sustainably as a core element of their product or service offering, which could include nature-based solutions. We see that with this growing demand for nature-based solutions, enterprises see a market opportunity, and we see an increase year by year in the amount of enterprises active on the market. So to give you a very short example of what kind of enterprises could be involved in the delivery of a nature-based solution. So in the first stage, the planning stage of a nature-based solution, landscape architects and biodiversity experts could be involved. Then in the second stage of capital investment, specialized horticulture contractors could be involved. And then in the third phase that focuses more on stewardship and long-term management and maintenance, you could think of a social enterprise that takes over the management. So this was a very, very short overview of the research that we've done on financing and entrepreneurship for a nature-based enterprise. We have summarized the findings in 2 guidebooks, respectively on financing and on entrepreneurship. And we have also included practical tips for how to apply those strategies and how to stimulate entrepreneurship for nature-based solutions. So that was all from me for today. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you very much for that, Esme, and a really helpful reminder there about the importance of ongoing revenue as well as capital when we're looking at resourcing and financing nature-based solutions and developing those long-term sustainable solutions and business models, and the importance of the skills that the skill set that we need in the sector now to be able to deal with that. That certainly isn't the background that many of us came in from. So some real challenges there around new skills, new capacity, and new partnerships. So it's lovely now to welcome all of our speakers onto the screen, and Esme may be looking a little bit like, oh, I am here. We weren't certain whether it would be Esme or Siobhan who was joining us from Connecting Nature. Siobhan's been teaching a class at Trinity College today and hasn't been able to make it over, but Esme is quite capably stepping into that chair as well. So what we're going to do now is just have a short panel session and just pick up some questions and some conversations. And I'm going to ask all of our speakers the same question, but I'm going to ask them to answer it thinking about different scales. So the question I'm going to ask is, thinking about a green recovery, what would be your key policy asks or fiscal changes or financial interventions to ensure that we can scale up and resource urban nature-based solutions? So this could be at EU or national government level, it could be at council or municipality level. So it's that aspect of imagining you've just got that opportunity for one very short pitch to your First Minister, your convener, your council leader. And for those of you out there in digital land as well, we would love to hear your responses to this question. This is a fantastic opportunity to really crowdsource the collective brain power, knowledge and experience of everyone sitting in this session. So those of you out there, please do start typing your responses into the chat. And if you see somebody type something that you agree with, please do, respond to endorse that. Please feel to pick up and run with Sunderland's solution and have a wee riff on it and add to those suggestions. So I think as I've been giving those instructions to colleagues online, that's given a wee bit of thinking time to our panelists as well. So I'm going to start in the same order that we did the presentations, and I'm going to come to Catherine first. So Catherine, thinking at a regional or a city scale, what would be your key policy ask, your fiscal or financial intervention?
Thanks, Julie. Well, at the city region level, we're quite constrained by what we can do. We have to recognize that there are sort of national level initiatives that are not necessarily our ability to sort of change and influence specifically. So I'm going to focus very much on what Glasgow City Region can do. Unsurprisingly, I would sort of say it's not about one specific intervention, but this is really about a systems-wide approach. Given that this event is called Connecting Nature, I think connecting up is really quite significant and quite important to sort of recognize a holistic nature of where nature-based solutions sit within broader sort of policy reform or kind of fiscal and financial innovation. So I would certainly say how we can connect up communities and neighborhoods. I think it was Aileen Campbell who talked about them being the experts, and certainly they know what is best and what is needed for their communities and their neighborhoods. And certainly I think the opportunities and offers of nature-based solutions really speak to those values of how they can be improved on their doorstep and how to sort of serve and meet their needs. But I would also say sort of connecting up the financial community. I think, Joe has spoken very clearly about the sort of disconnect, let's say. So I would want to see how local authorities in Glasgow City Region can perhaps kind of better collaborate with financial institutions to sort of better understand and mitigate the sort of investment risks that perhaps are sort of regarded or perceived with nature-based solutions, and also how to sort of structure our innovative sort of financing instruments to sort of attract private investment. But speaking specifically to Glasgow City Region, I think we have a really interesting opportunity right now in front of us, actually, about how to connect up some of these audiences and how to use existing and current kind of policy initiatives. In my presentation, I talked about Clyde Mission. And I think Clyde Mission is an example of how we want to avoid making the mistakes of the past. So particularly about the sort of city region deals that invested in all of that kind of grey infrastructure. How can we do things differently? And Clyde Mission has a call out at the moment. Deadline is Monday, 29th of March. So we have a few days. So with people living in Glasgow City Region, please submit your views and ideas of how you think Clyde Mission, together with government and private investment, can be securing and investing in those nature-based solutions, particularly in that urban context around the River of the Clyde, to secure that kind of better future. And I think, Clyde Mission, this is a perfect opportunity to really be engaging with our kind of current policy context and initiatives, and to be ensuring that nature-based solutions are sort of embedded and aligned across all the different work we're trying to do. So I'll leave it there.
That's great. Thank you very much, Catherine. And a really good call to action for people listening. Something you can tangibly do now to make this happen in Glasgow. And those themes around, connectivity, collaboration, alignment and embedding, I think are absolutely critical. And we see so many of those green deals, those interventions that don't really deliver, those city deals don't really deliver for us. So I'm going to turn to Jo now, because Jo's work's been working both at local levels and at national levels. So in terms of your ask to national government, whether that's Scotland or UK, what would that be, Jo?
Thanks, Julie. And I thought Catherine made some really good points there. I think when we had all of the discussions with different stakeholders as part of the £1 billion challenge, there were three things that emerged that we termed a kind of enabling framework, if you like, to be able to take things from just these sort of opportunities and a mixture of different financing mechanisms, but what needs to underpin those to actually help them succeed. And the first one of those was policy coherence. The second was, some initial investment. And the third one was all about sort of coordination and shared learning. So if I park that third one for the moment, because quite a lot of that is already happening within, the community of Scottish Conservation Finance pioneers. So to government, I think if we were to focus on policy coherence and investment specifically, I think the policy coherence argument is incredibly powerful, because as somebody in the whisky industry said to us during the £1 billion challenge, there's no point in that. We love this challenge, it's great and we're really supportive, but there's no point in developing all of these fantastic new sources of funding if at the same time we don't, for example, sort out things like harmful subsidies, which is attracting a lot of attention internationally. It's not just a Scottish issue. So first of all, I would suggest, in terms of thinking about urban green infrastructure, nature networks are really, really important. So to come back to the core theme of connecting nature, I think if we're to get the best possible value for the taxpayers' money, we need to think about planning natural infrastructure strategically. We don't plan grey infrastructure in a random way. We wouldn't ever build a road if that road didn't connect to something. So we need to think of nature in that regard. Secondly, on the policy coherence side, an example of what could be implemented in terms of thinking about how we make everybody part of the solution and how, in this case, developers work, is to think about what is called biodiversity net gain south of the border, but to make sure all developments are net positive for nature by the national planning framework for next year. I think that would be a really important step forward. So finally, I would say on the investment side, government plays a really, really crucial role in unlocking some of these sources of new funding from the private sector. And we've seen it time and time again in all of the people we've talked to from our international partners and so on. So we need some kind of investment readiness facility. And we've been calling for that, because we're not going to get from the standing start that we're sort of roughly at the moment. I mean, all sorts of interesting things are happening, but we're not going to get from where we are to suddenly having sort of self-sustaining initiatives that are entirely paid for by magical private finance if we don't plug the gap with something that helps develop those markets, build capacity and so on. And I think the Investment Readiness Fund, my understanding of the work that's been done elsewhere, including south of the border, but even including a few years ago with the European Investment Bank, is you often need a little bit more help in those early stages than people might expect. So that early stage investment is really, really crucial, I think.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for that, Jo. And I was hearing those words about policy coherence and remembering somebody yesterday was talking about the fact that we have an embarrassment of policy initiatives, which are often conflicting policy initiatives. And I think that is a huge challenge there. And you've started to address a couple of the comments that were coming up in chat around where does the polluter pay initiative kind of fit in, which is what we're hearing in terms of the whisky industry response, and what is the role of taxation in terms of some of those models. It isn't an either or. It's not all private finance. There's a real role for the public sector and public financing in stimulating this and those initial investments. So you mentioned there the European Bank as well in this. So I'll now come to Esme to take us up to that European scale. If you have a particular ask for either policy or fiscal or or finance interventions, what would that be?
Thank you, Julie. So I will rephrase your question a bit, because that's I would look a bit more into entrepreneurship, because that's what I've done research in, and that's what I know. So we've conducted a large survey under EU enterprises, and we found that a lot of them are small to micro enterprises. So a lot of enterprises that deliver nature-based solutions at the moment are small, and also what they would say their barrier is, or their barriers are, is that there's still a lack of awareness of the sector, but also of MBS in general. And also mainly among policymakers. So I think if you would look at an EU level, I think it would be very important that the EU will champion not only nature-based solutions, but also nature-based enterprises, and very much should communicate about the sector, about the potential of the sector that it could have in the green recovery. And I agree with the points made by Joe as well, that networks are very important in this, of course, because networks can very much promote the sector and their activities, and also coherence in policy on every level is of course of key importance as well. So yeah, I think those would be the main from an EU level for supporting enterprise.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that. And I know we'll be hearing a lot more about enterprise in the session coming up. And I think that's important, of recognising the scale, because we've talked a lot about community, and communities are the expert as well. So what are those roles for those community, social enterprises, social entrepreneurs in delivering nature-based solutions, as well as the larger scale government interventions and private sector? Okay, I'm going to ask one final question to all of our speakers, and I'm looking for a fairly quick response on this. And I'm borrowing a question that was asked at the Glasgow Place Commission yesterday, and it was an interesting one. Fast forwarding yourself now to 2030 and looking back now to where we are in 2021, what would your future self be saying to you now in terms of, I wish we had done this one thing now that would set us on the route to success for resourcing nature-based solutions? Now, that might be a wish that you might make for an individual or an organisation or a sector. Those of you watching, again, please do feel free to type that in chat. So, Joe, I'm going to come to you first off. What's your one wish looking back from 2030 to now, if only we had done?
Well, that's a great question, actually. And it's the $1 million question, isn't it? It's got to be about urgency. I mean, I think COP26 gives us, the best reason that I can think of to really step up the urgency. It's probably the most important, environmental event that arguably has ever taken place, and it's happening in Scotland. So I think it's making sure that urgency is understood in a positive way. There are positives that we can get from this for a green recovery from, the pandemic that we all need to find a way out of. I think the looking back thing is all going to be about urgency. So I hope that's brilliant. What we can achieve.
Yeah. Urgency, thank you. And COP26, if you haven't already been to the expert and given your suggestions for that, please do. So we're getting close on time, so I'm just going to come quickly now to Catherine for your one wish looking back from the future.
Well, I like Joe's response about urgency. I couldn't agree more, but I would say innovation. Don't be afraid to take risks. I think certainly within the public sector, private sector, there's a real kind of fear of taking risks and experimentation. And I think it's only through experimentation we're going to learn, and we're going to change and transform in a way that we really need to with the current challenges that we face. And it's not just about innovation in terms of technical. I'm talking about sort of policy innovation, social innovation, having those conversations with people that we don't normally do. So innovate like crazy.
And what a perfect line to finish this session on when they're with the Connecting Nature Innovation Summit. It's about innovation, and it's about urgency, and it's about starting to do things now at all scales. So brilliant. Thank you so much, all of you, for your contributions today. Really interesting, insightful, inspiring presentations and discussions. And with that, I shall hand over now to my colleague Emma Halliday to let us know what happens next for today. So thank you all very much for your wonderful contributions today. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Sean, and a very warm welcome everyone to this workshop on accelerating innovation and startups in the nature-based economy. Before I introduce you to our panel of speakers, and I'm going to present a video of some pretty cool nature-based enterprises from all across Europe. However, I thought first of all it could be interesting to provide you with some context on the topic that we're discussing here today. So what do we mean when we talk about the nature-based economy and nature-based enterprises? Let me see if I can click on to the first slide here. I think I'm a little bit over-enthusiastic on the clicking here. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay, excellent. So I really like this quotation that you can see here from John Bell, who's the director of the Healthy Planet Directorate at the European Commission. And he explains, I suppose, the nature-based economy and the potential of it much better than I could. So he explains how the EU recovery plan from COVID and the Green Deal will unleash this massive level of investment, which is being directed towards new types of business and new value chains. And these new value chains, these new types of businesses are much more in line with these ambitions of both the UK and Europe to transition towards a net zero economy by 2050. And he specifically identifies the potential of nature-based enterprises to be part of this recovery and to contribute to the Green Deal. And we can see from our own research that the number of nature-based enterprises is growing. So we undertook a survey. I think Esme will maybe present a little bit later on this, but you can see that the number of nature-based enterprises is growing. And why are we seeing so many more enterprises emerging in this sector? Well, I suppose quite simply they're responding to increased market demand. So we have seen over the last couple of years that the UN, the EC, and global bodies like the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, they've all mainstreamed this concept of nature-based solutions into their policies in the last years in order to address climate change and biodiversity loss. And it's not just at policy level and at public sector level where these policies are being taken up. We're also seeing increased demand for nature-based solutions from the private sector, in particular from large corporates who are investing in nature as a key asset for their business. However, on the flip side, we're also beginning to see that this increasing demand is leading to difficulties with supply. And I suppose this is really where nature-based enterprises come in. Nature-based enterprises can help public, private and third sector organisations to design, deliver and manage nature-based solutions in the long term. At this stage, I suppose you're wondering, what do we mean when we say a nature-based enterprise? Is it a new term? Well, I would say it's a new term, but it's an umbrella term for a number of organisations that perhaps already exist. This is the official definition, which is in a research publication available on our website. Nature-based enterprises, essentially, they use nature as a core element of their product or service offering. Nature may be used directly by growing, harnessing, harvesting or restoring natural resources in a sustainable way. For example, you have green buildings companies directly using nature. You may have ecosystem restoration organisations. Nature may also be used indirectly by contributing to the planning, delivery or stewardship of sustainable nature-based solutions. For example, we have landscape architects and we have companies using smart technologies to monitor and manage nature-based solutions in the long term. So there's a wide diversity of different types of enterprises who fall under this kind of umbrella term of nature-based enterprises. And I suppose what's really important and consistent with the European definition of nature-based solutions is that nature-based enterprises support climate change and biodiversity policy, and they generate benefits for local economies, for the communities, and for the wider environment. If you're interested in the concept, you'll find a lot more information on our platform. You'll find information, guidebooks, research publications, and so on. And indeed, if you're interested in actually, seeing the profiles, a number of these nature-based enterprises, or seeing what nature-based enterprises are active in your city or in your country, this platform actually aims to connect buyers and suppliers of nature-based solutions globally. It was launched just 6 months ago, and already there are hundreds of nature-based enterprises from across Europe and even further afield registered. And what I think is different about this platform, and what we really like about it, is at the heart of it are these communities of practice in different sectors. So these are just some of the communities, and you can see there that they're in different areas, from nature-based solutions, from green buildings, the very important topic of co-creation and how do you engage communities in building nature-based solutions, sustainable agriculture, and so on. But each of these communities is actually led by what we call an industry ambassador, who's a practitioner and a leader in their own field. And the goal of these communities is to network organisations, to bring them together to learn about industry best practice, and really to raise awareness of what's happening in the sector. And I was delighted actually in some of the networking sessions over the last couple of days to come across new startups, and a shout out here to Cisco from he set up a green wall company from Mallorca. A number of you might have met him in the networking sessions. And he's been following this community and learning from the industry leaders on how to do this. So best of luck with your new enterprise. Anyway, that's enough for me at this stage. If you're interested, and I should just say before I move on, that these communities aren't just for enterprises. If you're a city or you're a research centre and you're interested in this topic, this is very much open to engagement right across the board from many different stakeholders. And each of the communities organises a series of webinars on different topics. Okay, lastly, I just want to introduce you now to our panel of speakers. I'm trying to, so I'm delighted to introduce Stina Kondrup, who's one of the founders of the Incubator in Denmark. And she also wears the second cap as she's a nature-based entrepreneur herself. So hopefully we get a chance to hear more about your experiences on both sides. Then we have Stuart Connop. He's, again, wearing two caps. He's the technical guru here in Connecting Nature, and today will be presenting the Arena Incubator in London. Then we have Colm O'Driscoll, and Colm, I think we spoke to when we first started research in this area. Colm was one of the first people I spoke to, because it was the first, I think you're the first nature-based incubator in the world. A strong interest in sustainable forestry, but also in NBS for health and well-being. So I think you definitely probably have the advantage of being the longest established, although that's not very long. And then there are three incubators who we'll be hearing from. And then later on in the session, we'll be hearing from Agnieszka Osipiuk, who's the organiser-in-chief, I think we'll call you that today, of the Connecting Nature Summit. So we're coming to the end of the Glasgow Summit. But Agnieszka is just starting. Sean can breathe a sigh of relief, because Agnieszka is just starting to gear up for the summit at the end of June. And the summit will be entirely focused on the nature-based economy and nature-based enterprises. So on the 29th and 30th of June, I think registration is already pre-opened, so I hope you can join us there. And finally, we'll finish off with Sean Kelly, multi-talented organiser-in-chief. He thought he was a planner, but now he's organising an incubation programme. So we're delighted to have Sean join us at the end of the session to explain the kind of pilots which are happening in this area in Glasgow. Esme will be channeling some questions from the chat to us, so please, I encourage you to add your questions, your comments on this really exciting topic, and we'll come to them after we have a little listen now. First of all, to some nature-based enterprises. So we have a little video prepared, and this features 12 nature-based enterprises we've managed to squeeze in from 8 different countries across Europe, and it'll just give you a flavour of the diversity of nature-based enterprises that we're talking about here today.
I am a landscape architect, publisher and podcaster, and I had the pleasure of designing 20 natural playgrounds in kindergartens and 3 school grounds. Our gardens serve children and teachers. They allow close contact with nature. They should be an everyday landscape.
We are from the Syriza Playground. We started this organization about 1 year ago out of our love in Brussels.
Painting murals together with people, allowing them to discover their neighborhoods in creative ways. It is the community that allows us to exist, so we really take their contribution very seriously.
I work in the nature-based enterprise Cuatro Rayas, located in A Coruña, Spain. We rebuild spaces and landscapes to make them more efficient and sustainable. We work with the Cultural Association of Leira to take cultural context into account when planning organic farming projects.
We're the School of Looking.
Our project is the Eco Showboat, a zero-carbon floating art science infrastructure.
The venue is a historic barge where we will develop art, science and educational projects about climate change and freshwater ecology.
And we'll be working with communities we meet as we travel across Ireland, navigating the inland waterways.
This is Damian, a head of development from Deepster, innovation-oriented SME from Koper, Slovenia, a country about 60% covered by forest. We develop wooden furniture without artificial materials using domestic wood species, 100% natural processing with no chemical additives, biodegradable and recyclable. Our furniture won several international design awards and have been recognized as excellent eco-product.
I am the founder of Bollenstreek Hout in the Netherlands, collecting trees and upgrade them to a local product. We like to put new trees for every tree we are receiving. Our main activity is to become a source bank for trees.
I'm an architect and the managing director of Helix Pflanzensysteme in Convestheim, Germany. We develop vertical green systems, we build and maintain instant green noise barrier walls and manage the growth of the vegetation. We love to work with nature and have the ecosystem services of our vertical green gardens to make urban areas more livable and more resilient.
Gecko Gardens is a nature-based enterprise located in Stuttgart, Germany. We empower city people to produce organic food everywhere. We do this with our Gecko Garden systems, which fertilize and irrigate themselves automatically. Your kitchen waste gets recycled in our integrated vermicompost and enables you to produce fresh herbs and vegetables everywhere.
Well, the Citizen Buy Garden is a combination of a garden, and it also has space and storage space for bikes. There is a blackboard that is also meant for communication with neighbors. So it actually combines 3 things: a garden, a bike shed, and a way to communicate and cooperate with neighbors. A lot of neighbors actually wanted to contribute, and so the team actually evolved into this beautiful group of people that came and went and all put their tiny contributions to the garden.
I'm from company Naturem Solutions in Belgium. We've been active since 2018 as a consultancy in the field of water management and treatment.
Our mission is to protect bees and to spread urban beekeeping as a virtuous practice for sustainable cities and communities. In 2019, we developed and we launched across the globe an innovative urban beehive who makes beekeeping safe, simple and interactive.
I'm an ecological engineer and entrepreneur dedicated to applying emerging technologies to improve the health of urban ecosystems for future generations. I work with a company called Soil Mania and combines decades of experience in soil biology and arboriculture to create 3 different state-of-the-art soil sensors. Our most popular is the soil moisture sensor, which lets people understand where soil is too dry and where it might need water. This can really revolutionize nature-based solutions and how we manage green infrastructure, mostly because we're moving from a currently very reactive sector to a proactive sector.
The most important challenge we face is education. We talk and write about nature deficit disorder and why play in the nature is so important for small children.
We are engaging the community with participatory activities and try to build bridges between the communities, between the different groups, and also strengthen their connection with the city itself.
When planning organic farming projects, considering factors such as location and levels of sunshine. And we also carry out digital surveys to propose consensual ideas like in A Coruña Hosa Park.
The main challenge is actually to get funding to pre-finance the source, because time from receiving the tree up to fabricated product is approximately 1 to 2 years, depending on the species.
So is it perfect? No, it is not. But do we need more projects like this to learn how to cooperate, to learn how to talk to each other and to have conversations about the future of our city? Yes, absolutely. It's only by doing those projects that we learn how to work together.
The main challenge we've encountered in that field is the lack of regulatory constraints and also a lack of client awareness about nature-based solutions.
One of the main challenges we run into is helping people understand that technology is not something to be afraid of. In fact, technology can really help optimize the way that we manage nature-based solutions.
If I could give you some advice, talk with people about their fears, explain, educate, and be patient.
You are a nature-based enterprise. Does it make a difference for people and for society what you do and the services you offer? Then go ahead, stick to your goals and do one step after the other. You are going to perform a marathon. Make sure you can earn money with your doings and be aware of your resources.
Stay patient, keep going, and believe in yourself. All the good things take time.
Pilot it, test it, and keep iterating and rapid prototyping until you found something that works. Don't forget to tell everybody about the great work you're doing. Communication is half the battle.
I like to say that it's important to know the past to build the future.
Our advice to succeed and grow is to dream big and never forget why you're doing what you're doing.
Fantastic. So I hope you're all suitably inspired by some of our creative entrepreneurs. Now we've had a look at some of our nature-based enterprises. It's time to meet some of the people behind the scenes, some of the incubators who are working to support these entrepreneurs and help their businesses to start up and grow. So I'm going to ask each of our 3 incubators, Stephen, Stuart and Colin, to give a brief presentation, first of all, 2 minutes on their own incubator, and then we'll go and have a panel discussion where we will address some of the questions and some of the challenges brought up by the nature-based enterprises in that video. So, Stephen, can I hand over to you to introduce Greencubator?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Stine, and I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you all to the organizers for this platform to engage in the discussion about startups in the nature-based economy. I represent Greencubator, which is a community of SMEs, entrepreneurs, and NGOs. I co-founded Greencubator back in 2015, and we have hosted more than 300 entrepreneurs working with sustainability, and a lot of them working directly or indirectly with nature-based solutions.
The vision with Greencubator is to create a platform where everyone gets the opportunity to contribute to the green transition through entrepreneurship, community building, and partnerships. Our place in the entrepreneurial ecosystem is in the sprouting premature stage, where our partnerships with professional advisories help companies with legal documentation, pitching training, sales, marketing, and communication workshops, recruiting talents, and very important, fundraising. With our collaborative workspace, networking events, and advisory services, we aim to create a platform for sustainable development. Let me just go to the next slide here. In parallel to Greencubator, I founded Into Green, which today employs 6 people working with interactive educational platforms and design development advisory of purpose-driven projects. Today, we are partners in the European Horizon 2020 project ReGreen, and with our activities, we aim to foster and promote nature-based enterprises and develop interactive educational material about nature-based solutions. I hope that gave a little insight to what we're doing. Thank you.
That's great, Steen. Thank you so much. And I think it's always interesting to see it from both sides of the fence. So you're almost always better to be able to give advice and support to startups when you've been in that position yourself. But let's move now to a little bit closer to home and to London. And Stuart, could I ask you to perhaps introduce a little bit the kind of the background and the activities of Arena?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I just echo the thanks for giving this opportunity. So I'm Stuart, as Siobhan said. I'm from the University of East London Sustainability Research Institute, and I'm one of the team of researchers working on the Arena Business Support Programme in London in the UK. Arena started in April 2019 and was part of the legacy of the partnership between the Sustainability Research Institute and Barking Riverside Limited that developed during the EU FP7 project TURAS. So within TURAS, we worked collaboratively with Barking Riverside on a living lab style approach to the development of a new community housing 26,000 people in East London. The project had a specific focus on the design of the green infrastructure across the development to deliver nature-based solutions to local challenges. We also worked on building social capacity, both in terms of the new community coming in, but also in relation to bridging to the existing community in the neighbouring areas. One topic that had less focus was the economic aspects of nature-based solutions, and in particular, the opportunities around entrepreneurship and nature-based enterprises. And we recognised this was a key market gap in terms of business support. A new ecology centre at the heart of the development represented an opportunity for us to focus on this, and a programme was developed where a collaboration between our research institute and Barking Riverside is now supporting businesses and startups locally and across London involved in nature-based solutions, green infrastructure and resource efficiency. Let me just see if I can change the slide. Yeah, we're providing a diverse range of support types, bespoke to the needs of individual businesses, and this support's being delivered across a range of geographical contexts. Firstly, at our university campuses, using our facilities, laboratories and analytical equipment. Secondly, at the Barking Riverside Ecology Centre, which can be used as an exhibition space to showcase and test emerging nature-based solution and resource efficiency products at the heart of this large-scale housing development. And thirdly, using a network of living labs across London to monitor and evaluate nature-based solution products in situ after they've been installed. Thanks.
Thank you, Stu. That is great. I mean, I think it's what your presentation has shown there is really the importance of partnering as well with research institutes, in particular in an area like nature-based solutions, where there's often a very strong technical component and there's a lack of evidence of impact. So the fact that you can support businesses in measuring their impact, I think, is a really, really important aspect of the services you offer. So now we move to Colm. The very first, we probably should have started with you, Colm, actually. But if you can introduce us perhaps a little bit to Etifor and your experience with that incubation program.
Yeah, thank you, Siobhan, and thank you to Connecting Nature for this opportunity, and thanks also for nominating Etifor, because I think it's the right place to start with this experience. I can't take much of the praise for EcoStar. I'm not the founder. I was the program manager, but EcoStar was a journey. It was an experience, and we were actually the first accelerator. But it was the founder of the company that I work for, which is also a nature-based enterprise, Etifor SRL, who actually also founded the accelerator for which I went on then to develop the program for. Where the idea came from, really looking at something that we are familiar with in our company, which is sustainable forest management and everything that goes with that. And we really looked at the problems connected to these and looked at the possibility and the opportunity, the future opportunity that exists with halting, for example, deforestation. As you can see here, the value of what that is worth by 2030, and that value is actually changing on an annual basis as the value increases, the value of nature. We also looked at, on a Europe-wide scale, the level of entrepreneurship education in our sector. So again, looking at agriculture and forestry sectors. And we found that 1 in 10 schools is actually providing entrepreneurship education in the EU, which is shocking, to be honest, because it's an underfunded sector, but it's also, in relation to entrepreneurship education, is also a sector that is lacking this kind of opportunity. We also looked at what 400 million entrepreneurs do around the world to try and fine-tune and better our own model, which went on to become the Nature Accelerator. And with that, we developed, we wrote first a project. The project was EcoStar. It was a project co-funded by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union. And we wrote this project as a business model, and the business model itself was the Nature Accelerator. And the Nature Accelerator was essentially then funded by an impact investor in the US who essentially gave us the opportunity to run the world's first Nature Accelerator. And from then we have run other programs. So that's essentially the story.
Very good. Thanks, Colm, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about the kind of your experience as we move into the panel discussion. So actually, what I'd like to do now is maybe, first of all, go back to the video and look at some of the challenges which were identified by our nature-based enterprises. A question I always wonder is, to what extent the challenges faced by nature-based enterprises is the same or different to the challenges faced by any other type of startup. So maybe, Colm, we'll stick with you for the moment, and we'll come to this perennial question of financing. I mean, this is always an issue for any startup across any sector. But one of the things that jumped out for me was the video was Ted. Ted mentioned that the particular issue around working capital. And he mentioned that sometimes it can take up to 2 years from when they get the raw material in the form of the tree to the end product. That seems to me to be perhaps longer than, say, certainly a tech startup. In your experience, though, is there generally a longer time frame before these nature-based enterprises get out of that, valley of death and start making revenues and reach that point of viability, I suppose? Is that your experience? And if it is your experience, how have you addressed this challenge, or how have you seen it addressed?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, but if I remember correctly, the example, I mean, we're looking at possibly in this particular case, almost an artisan-like product where a lot of effort is going into the production almost by hand of something that comes from, yes, a raw material. I would say this, yeah, it really depends on the service and it really depends on the product. Getting, I suppose, speeding up the financing is always a difficult one. Also because these business models, essentially in our experience, the business models are doing more than just what other startups will be doing. They're also looking at focusing on impact, or they're also looking at focusing on maybe the sustainable management of the resources where they're sourcing their raw materials from. Or maybe they're targeting a market that is slightly more, I would say, sensitive to ethical aspects or social aspects or environmentally friendly aspects, and these things all take a little bit more time, I think. So trying to penetrate that kind of market takes time. Also, products may, for example, be applying some sort of standard or certification, in which case, if they're doing that, these things also take time as well. Thinking about wood products, for example, we have a classic certification scheme called Forest Stewardship Council. And if you really want to integrate the FSC certification, and if you really want to incorporate these kind of certifications or standards into your business model to show people that you're doing things sustainably or ethically or socially or whatever in a responsible way, then it's most likely that it's going to take a little bit longer. That said, how can you speed it up? I mean, what we've seen, we had a very interesting business model in our accelerator. It was actually they were selling insect crackers, and these guys, they essentially, when they came to us, they had been bootstrapping their business for a couple of years, and ours was the first investment that really was a big hit for them in terms of interest, but also somebody turning around, oh, wow, this is interesting. But 2 years later, 3 years later, they're still finding it difficult. They have made one big contract with Sainsbury in the UK with this model, and now they have their insect crackers on the shelves of Sainsbury. But what did it take for them to get there? It actually took a pivot. It took a changing of the brand. It took a changing of the name. It took all four of them renting the same place for 3 years, saving money, and so on and so forth. You have to keep testing the market, and it's not easy. And if you find also that the market is just not interested in your product, you also need to change focus. I don't know if that maybe answers in part the question, but
Yeah.
there's a lot there, and I would say the service is really depending much on the service and the product being offered.
Yeah, thank you, Colm. And indeed, I think part of the challenge is raising awareness of the differences and these kind of longer time frames. And that is something which maybe if policymakers and startup business programs are unfamiliar with nature-based enterprises, I suppose raising awareness among this audience that this is the norm. You mentioned standards and certification, and it reminded me a little bit of the pharma sector. Not perhaps an obvious comparison, but also in terms of the long time frames to get launch on the market, and then importance of certification and standards. So I think a kind of key element is the need for awareness among policymakers and programs to support that kind of valley of death, and realise that very often it's a longer time frame to market. So that kind of issue of education and awareness is something which I think a number of different enterprises identified in the video. And Stuart, just coming to you, maybe, how have you found this lack of awareness? Have you found it to be a major challenges for the kind of enterprises that you're supporting? And how have you helped them address this?
Yeah, definitely. I recognise this as a challenge for the businesses we've been supporting too. We see the lack of awareness of nature-based solutions and lack of acceptance of this approach to urban design, including kind of regulatory constraints, as a big barrier for many of the businesses. The businesses are trying to implement multifunctional solutions, often in sectors that are based on single or very narrow performance outcomes, and sectors based traditionally on kind of grey infrastructure engineered approaches. It can be quite challenging to make the case for broader benefits in such situations. For example, a standard roof performs a very narrow function, keeps a building warm, keeps the inside of the building dry. A green roof, by contrast, can perform a whole range of other functions, but in a market that only values the building being warm and dry, and with regulatory constraints designed for this, arguing the value of a green roof can be quite challenging. On top of this, if there's only previously been these kind of green bling type approaches to green infrastructure, or even nature-based solutions that for some reason are perceived to fail, perhaps because the stewardship plan wasn't in place, negative perceptions associated with this can require a really significant evidence base to change standard practices and processes. So in ARENA, one of the things that we're doing is helping to address these challenges by providing support on particularly building evidence in relation to nature-based solution products and services for our MBEs, supporting them in developing new markets, but also in competing with other approaches in these existing markets.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and I suppose it echoes, the point that I made after your introduction, that nature-based solutions, whether they're implemented by the public sector or whether the champion is in the private sector or even nature-based enterprise, one of the big challenges is how do you measure impact and how do you measure effectiveness in comparison with other solutions. So again, it's really important that I suppose nature-based enterprises take this seriously, and one of the most successful methods of raising awareness that we hear from the 10 cities involved in connecting nature is, organising a pilot, and the results from the pilot are very often provide the kind of evidence base that's needed for a larger scale rollout, and it kind of overcomes that initial fear of the unknown. So I suppose, speaking of the fear of the unknown, Estina, I might come to you because I know you mentioned your startup, Intergreen, is in the technology space. And I suppose technology is maybe not something that we would often associate with nature-based enterprises, but we have a whole community on the use of smart technologies for nature-based solutions, and it's really important. But have you come across this lack of awareness of the potential to harness technology, and how have you addressed that both in your own business and the businesses that you support in this space?
Well, also a very tricky question, because the use of technology can be very different. In Intergreen, we work with technology as a magnifier to get experiences in nature. We work indirectly with nature-based solutions with development of educational platforms, exhibitions, and apps that are connected to location-specific activities in nature. Because we believe that in order to accelerate the green transition, we need to foster a bottom-up demand. And we need to reconnect and experience the wonders of nature in order to fight for more nature and rewilding the nature. So the way we work with technology is to enhance these experiences, in most of the cases, urban nature. And so we have a experience with developing an app called Worldsify, which is a location-based visual storytelling in nature. And we've, of course, met people. So we developed this app some years ago, and we were met by people who would find it very paradoxical, as you mentioned, to use technology to experience nature, because some believe that we need to disconnect to connect with nature. However, we see the feedback we get from the users is that this kids app and the activities really guide to unexpected knowledge and experiences. And most important, that this creates a common story, or it connects the kids and the parents in the natural platform there. So I think the fear of technology, if we were talking about this a few years ago, I think my answer would be very different, because right now in Copenhagen there is really a wave of awareness about nature, and it's a very political infected topic at the moment, because we have some great urban nature spaces that are being sold by the municipality to housing instead of these recreational spaces. And I think we can use technology to create this awareness about the importance of nature. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think I really like the different aspects of the way you can use technology. So you mentioned raising awareness, and I know my own kids are always stuck on their apps the whole time. I'd love to see them even using their apps outdoors. Would be a great progress from using them indoors. But to use them to discover nature in an interactive way, I think it's really the importance of interacting with kids, and we saw that in the video from Poznan with all of the natural playgrounds. It's really important to instill that love of education or love of nature in children from a very young age. And the other aspect of technology which we saw in the video was, again, going back to the monitoring and being able to measure impact, and as Stuart mentioned earlier, being able to ensure the effective management and stewardship of nature-based solutions in the long run. So I think technology is perhaps an area that's been underexplored in terms of its application to nature, and maybe within this smart cities dimension that we keep hearing about, that this is an area where we could explore more pilots. I'm going to just invite, by the way, I see there's a couple of questions coming through in the chat. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to add them. I've got a couple of other questions from our panel, and then we will go to the questions from chat. So please keep the questions coming, that would be great. Just before we move on, because I want to look at your own incubators and the financing and business models that you have, because there's not very many incubators supporting this sector, and I want to understand a little bit about your own business models. But just before we do that, just to ask, from your experience, do the nature-based enterprises that you're dealing with, do they have any different requirements in terms of supports than kind of other types of startups? I don't know who wants to start with that. Colm, you're nodding vigorously, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, they do. I mean, in part, well, we had a particular model in the sense that we were kind of learning by doing when we did it, and we have a little bit more of experience of it now. But when we were approached by this impact investor Fledge series in the US from Seattle, they kind of handed us their methodology. And we said, wow, okay, we weren't used to something like that before. And they hand you their tools and the criteria and the impact, the assessment, all of this stuff is given to you and you understand what they want. But we also wanted our own. We also wanted a kind of a unique factor to this accelerator and what we wanted to choose from the startups as well. So sustainability for us was key. Sustainability, management of the resources. So in relation to, speaking about it earlier, for example, it could be again sort of standards or certification that show that the product or the service has been coming from sustainably managed areas. Or it could also come from, for example, other organizations that you have an idea that these organizations are trustworthy. They're maybe even transparent in their activities. So we try to add our own elements to this impact assessment criteria that we're given. Sustainability was one, obviously because we were an EU-based accelerator. The any startups that came from within the European Union was another factor, although that may be different from accelerator to accelerator. But I would say sustainability for us was one of the most important, and how you evaluate a sustainability is quite difficult in the sense that we had different elements that told us whether or not the model was sustainable, and this can also be in relation to its impact. For example, how many, if we're looking at models that have an impact on the amount of people that where the resource is coming from, this can be in jobs given to women, for example, if we're looking at gender, or the way in which it brings the community together, so stronger social capital. These are all elements that we looked at that kind of contributed to the sustainability approach and evaluation of the businesses.
Okay, so that's a kind of a key differentiating feature, both in terms of the types of enterprises you selected in the first place. Okay, so maybe looking at, so that, I suppose, in terms of the question about what types of supports they required, they would have required more supports in terms of working through this kind of certification and standards and being able to show this sustainability aspect. Maybe if I ask Stuart and Stina the same question, were there any kind of specific supports that you identified among nature-based enterprises that could be maybe different from others? Stuart?
Yeah, sure. I think Colm's comment at the start about learning by doing was is very appropriate. I think heading into our incubator, our support, we thought that perhaps we could provide kind of some generic support tools similar to that we've provided in other incubator projects that would be relevant to lots of companies. And whilst they do have similar needs in relation to other sectors in some aspects, what we really found was that they have very specific support needs, and the support that we provided has been very bespoke. A lot of this is related to expertise in aspects like ecology, like performance evaluation and carbon accounting for natural systems. One particular challenge for MBEs relates to the lack of certainty in terms of performance. Because MBEs deliver projects based on nature-based solutions and nature and natural processes, performance can vary very much dependent on location, maturity, environmental conditions. And this means that a kind of a traditional product development pathway using lab testing and then rollout is not always applicable or appropriate. So there's really a need to adapt and provide support to tackle this kind of complexity in terms of their product. We've also found that one thing that's been incredibly useful has been networking support. Connecting different MBEs together has really been a very effective process for our MBEs. With lots of businesses that we're supporting, developing really new and emerging products and services, we've found that there's real synergies between the technologies that they're developing and real opportunities to bring these together to support each other, but also kind of to develop new products, bringing these NBEs together in these clusters.
Okay, that's fantastic. So, Stina, we've heard networking is really important. Really technical support in terms of being able to, I suppose, come back to measure the impact, and then the importance of standards and certification and kind of guiding startups through that process. Anything else that you've come across?
Well, I can really emphasize the network because that's really what Greencubator is. The community that we built there is basically around network, because we know the importance of using each other, collaborating, sharing information, inspiration, knowledge, competences, and so on. It really depends on the service, of course, what challenge these MBEs are meeting. If we divide them into small services regarding very how to categorize, like projects that are under a certain I actually don't know how to categorize this, but we have two different categories of services within MBEs in Greencubator, and we have the bigger projects that are collaborating with a lot of stakeholders, so political, legal, commercial stakeholders. It can be an urban farm on top of a commercial store. So we really see that these types of projects need legal advisory, but definitely also funding advisory, because we're talking much bigger budgets. Another thing that we realized doing our learning by doing is also the communication part of it, because I don't know if that's a tendency in Denmark, but the fear of greenwashing, the fear of stating that you have an impact but you can measure it, as we talked about. So communicating about your project and the impacts is really important as well, and a big challenge.
Yeah. Thanks, Stina. And I think that ties back to the point Colin made at the start about the importance of standards and certification, because there's this whole, and it's an issue that we always face, even on our own platform, when we're looking at enterprises. How do you ensure that, there's no greenwashing going on, that this is a genuine nature-based enterprise, in that it's contributing sustainably to biodiversity and to nature conservation. So guys, that's really interesting. If I could move maybe now a little bit to your own incubators, because as I was saying, the number of nature-based enterprises is growing, and so far there's a lot of incubators, accelerator support programs across Europe targeting different industry sectors. But I have to say, I haven't come across too many focusing on this area. There's a lot in clean tech, there's a lot in energy, transport, sustainable transport. But in this area of kind of nature, using nature sustainably, and there's the diversity that we showed there is a lack of programs, maybe because the concept is so new and really it's only really starting to gain traction now. But I'm sure, like any incubator, it's a business. And could I maybe just talk to you a little bit and ask each of you about the funding sources for your own incubator and accelerator, and your own strategies for sustainability? And I might come to you, Colin, first, because you've been around first. So, Colin, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we already have other programs in the pipeline. They've evolved a little bit since EcoStar, and you're absolutely right to say there are few programs like this. Before we even set up, we did a kind of an analysis of what was out there to understand how best to position ourselves, but there really wasn't anything out there, so we didn't have to worry about where to position ourselves, and that was great. But there are many, I would say, many accelerators focusing on what's what's popular in terms of impact. When you get sort of the amount of impact investment that's available now for certain accelerators and certain startups coming from developing countries, there's a lot there, philanthropy funds and so on. There's a lot there. For I would say for Europe, there's a lot less. And we question ourselves still why this is. We have a particular model in that, like I said in the very first presentation, we were able to present a project in a European funded program. And through that, through the business model that we developed, which was essentially the project itself, we presented it to an investor, and we were able to go to the European Commission and say, listen, what do you think about this? Is this possible? And they said, yeah, but they were really interested. So they were a little bit flexible with us too. And EcoStar was born. And we have actually managed to replicate this in other ways, in other European funded projects since, in diverse forms. I mean, the model is more or less the same, similar in that the accelerator program and so on, the startups that we're looking at. We haven't been able since to receive the same kind of private investment. And again, this is something we're looking into at the moment. The developing countries, so specifically Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, these are more popular countries when it comes to impact investment. Europe is still catching up, I think, when it comes to that are kind of models that we're running, the kind of models that we're interested in our programs. So I would say we have, two more in the pipeline at the moment. We have one focusing on nature and health. It's Green4C. Again, we apply a very similar model, but the focus is on more social enterprises, social nature-based enterprises, where again our focus is very much here on of course the nature element, but we're trying to connect what also nature can do for health, for human health. And then we've just started running another one, which the program itself will run in 2 years. It's on urban forestry, so nature-based enterprises for urban forestry, specifically focusing on urban forestry. And the model again is quite similar.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm hearing two kind of things there. First of all, I suppose the importance of European support in getting these programs off the ground in the first place. And secondly, a little bit worrying, this lack of impact investors in Europe in this field in comparison to other developing countries. And I think that's a curiosity which we could probably spend another half an hour discussing that in detail. And maybe in another panel session we will. But Stina, maybe if I ask you in terms of Greencubator, because you've been going, did I hear you correctly? You said 300 startups you've supported at this stage. So would you say you have the sustainability model for your own incubator sussed at this stage?
Yes, well, Greencubator doesn't have a big financial muscle, actually. We're a non-profit, independent of public funding. Our financial model is very much program-based funding, if we do innovation programs, accelerator programs. But also we have memberships, both companies using our facilities, but also memberships for the network events and other services that we provide. And then we have partnerships. So yeah, Greencubator, we try to be independent and not politically controlled in what to focus on or do or deliver, because we found that a lot of projects end up in administration and less action. So we try to keep it very action based and as independent as possible.
Keeping it real. Good. I like the diversity of your approach there as well, which is important, not to be kind of over-reliant on one source of funding. Stu, can I ask you maybe from your perspective, what's your kind of funding model? You're probably new to the most recent thing. So what's your future funding model?
Yes, speaking of not relying on a single funding stream, ARENA is built on an EU funding model as well. So it was funded through the European Regional Development Funding, matched with funding from the university and some funding from Barking Riverside Limited, this company that's developing this new community in East London. So in total, budget's about £1 million, with 50% of it coming from ERDF. And the business support is focused through this brand new ecology centre at the development. Originally, there was a plan to use the ecology centre financing as match for the project, which would have increased the budget of the project. But this didn't happen in the end because of a technicality. But it's definitely a good approach for similar initiatives. If these capital expenses are being put in and there's opportunities to build kind of incubators around them. In terms of sustainability, obviously ERDF is not an option for us in the UK going forward, unfortunately. Although we have already rolled out similar approaches through a East of England and a South East England project using ERDF funding. So it's definitely an approach that would be transferable to other locations in Europe, just not ours. So in the UK, we need to look at other business support and innovation funding opportunities to keep the NB incubator accelerator project going. So far this has included applying for EU Horizon 2020 funding under the Green Deal call, but we're also looking at more local funding sources around business support. And the other aspect to our sustainability is our relationship with the businesses that we work with and that we're supporting. So on the back of several of our arena business assists, we've developed bids for further funding, further collaborative and knowledge exchange funding. This has included EU research funding and innovation funding, but also local and national knowledge exchange funding.
Okay. Right, so I'm hearing there a lot of importance, in particular in getting these kind of programs off the ground, that EU funding and other types of public sector funding is particularly important initially. But then I think, Stina, and I think this is maybe something that Stu, that you could look towards the model that they have in Green Incubator, this membership model, the partnerships, I think in the long term, to bring in these more independent sources of financing sounds like a more sustainable approach in the long run. But speaking, I suppose, of the importance of public support, at this stage I'm going to ask Agnieszka Ospiuk to join us in the panel. There we go. She's going to join us, and then we'll go back to the panel to take the questions from the chat afterwards. But we've heard a lot there, Agnieszka, about the importance of early stage funding from the public sector. And I suppose what I'd like you to do maybe is perhaps tell us what you're going to do in Poznan in June to raise awareness about this topic among policymakers and about other audiences. So maybe could you give us a sneak preview as to what you have planned in Poznan? And again, if anyone's got any questions or answers, they can post them in chat. And thank you for the questions coming in. I'm just reading through them and preparing them for the next session.
Okay, thank you, Siobhan. Good afternoon. Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, can you hear me now? Yes. Thank you, Siobhan. It's great to be here today with you. And on behalf of the city of Poznan and Poznan Connecting Nature team, I would like very warmly invite you to Connecting Nature Enterprise Summit in Poznan in Poland. Please remember the date, 29th and 30th June this year. Fantastic Glasgow Summit, great event, great people, is coming slowly to the end. But topics we could hear, present, learn, talk about are so worth further exploring that we just have to meet once again, and let's do it in Poznan. And later, let's do it once again in Gang. Firstly, let me show you where Poznan is located. We are in the west central part of Poland, in Greater Poland, Wielkopolska region. And we really hope that soon you will be able to visit us, not only virtually, and enjoy our parks, our forests, rivers, lakes, the same as our heritage and cultural venues Poznan is famous for. But as for now, we would like to present in June other face of Poznan. Maybe you don't know, but in Poland, Poznan is known as a city with entrepreneurship spirit. So let's check how it looks like. And in Poznan, we will be talking about such topics as: what are the barriers and solutions for nature-based enterprises and how they correspond with expectation from the public sector, which is responsible for the majority of blue and green infrastructure in the cities. So it will be about public tenders versus business models. What are financing possibilities and business model just for nature-based solutions? NPS products and services can be driving force for local development. but how to find a common understanding on that new market between demand side and suppliers. And yes, here also the greenwashing subject could be very interesting for all of us. Nature-based enterprises. Do we always talk about the same? We learned a lot of examples about business and people behind it here in Glasgow, but we need more explore it. It's still a new market, and there are different languages of nature-based enterprises, different phases of nature-based economy, also creative one. So let's talk about it more. And I'm sorry, and one more thing. You are very welcome to plenary policy sessions, to parallel thematic sessions with different communities of connecting nature NBA platform and exploring possibilities of it. You will be invited for capacity building for enterprises and support organizations. And you will have chance to compare the challenges of nature-based economy in Europe and Brazil. And of course, we do our best to even in these virtual circumstances to show you our city and projects we developed, like natural playgrounds with eco-demonstrators, floating gardens, our new experiences with opening and sharing green public space in the city, and many, many more. So remember, 29th and 30th June, stay tuned and pre-register for Poznan Summit. Siobhan, over to you.
I hope you can stay with us because I think you've got a really diverse program lined up for us there. So, well, I'm definitely looking forward to participating. Okay, so now we're going to head over to some of the questions from the chat, and then we will conclude the session closer to home. We'll give Sean a chance to tell us a little bit about what is being planned in Glasgow. Don't look so happy, Sean. Okay, so the first question that I know here is what support is available from EU national state governments, and the question is posed by somebody from Ireland who's wondering if state agencies such as Enterprise Ireland are up to speed on NBS innovation, and I think you fear they're not, but actually I have good news for you, they very much are. And in fact I would say that Enterprise Ireland, and I'm going to give a shout out to Mark Sweeney, who's the national contact point for Horizon 2020 in Enterprise Ireland, and has been one of the greatest supporters in Ireland of nature-based solutions. And we have a number of different sectors involved, and cities from Limerick and Cork, Dublin, and projects from Go Green Roots, Connecting Nature, before that Terrace, which Stu also mentioned. And I know that Mark has recently joined, has been invited to join a European-wide network of startups as part of the Network Nature kind of joint action, which aims to get kind of national contact points across Europe, exchanging experience and talking about best practice and how they can support this sector. In saying that, I'd like to see more, of course. I'd like to see a much more active engagement in terms of the kind of specific support measures that could be put in place. But we certainly have a really strong advocate and champion in Mark. I don't know for the rest of you guys, maybe I don't know what the situation is in Italy, for example, in terms of support from state agencies specifically for this type of entity. Colin, are there specific supports?
Yeah, there are many grants available. It's not one of the sectors, especially public funding, that I deal with specifically, but I know there are many grants, innovation grants available, even accelerator grants available in Italy. They're very competitive when they do come out, so you have to know how to write very well these proposals. But I would say there are, on the contrary, depending on the sector, some innovation hubs in Italy that are very interesting, private innovation hubs. And specifically, I'm speaking about, well, in our sector, there's H-Farm. I'm not sure if anybody has heard of it before, but it's the Silicon Valley of forestry and agricultural sector in Europe at the moment. Is an extremely interesting one if you're working in these sectors. Very tech oriented. But they have grown. They have a very interesting accelerator model, and they accept applications from all over Europe, all over the world. And they have a series of accelerators on continuous cycles, and that could be one. Other ones Milan is quite full of as well different innovation hubs. These again will be private. So public funding there is, but it's quite competitive. In the private sector you get most again. But again, speaking about nature-based enterprises more specifically, I would say H-Farm is the most interesting for those.
Okay, that's interesting.
And
I'm glad you.
Yeah, sorry, just also there are a number of other much smaller incubators, social impact oriented incubators. Again, they would accept most, I would say most nature-based enterprise models if there is an element of impact in the integrated somehow into the business model.
Okay, I think you raise a really good point there, not just to look at the public sector, but also to see how can we engage private sector investment in this area, which goes back to the earlier point about the lack of impact investors in the EU in comparison with other areas. But it's good to know that there is there is both. We should be looking at both the private sector support as well as the public sector. Very quickly, in Denmark, is it the same situation? Would you say that there is a good support for nature-based enterprises in either the public or private, or both, Stina?
I think there is a rising tendency, yes, towards this, but there are still we still have lack of political will. There's a lot of talking, but very little walking. But I think we see a rising awareness of the importance of supporting with public funding, and also private investors in nature-based solutions.
Yeah, I always use the comparison with the nature-based enterprises with the creative industry sector. Like 20 years ago, nobody had heard of the creative industry sector, and it is a collective term, an umbrella term for a group of companies in an area. But now every single city, every single country has recognized the potential of this sector. And that's what I think with nature-based enterprises. And as we move towards this Green Deal and, the Green Deal vision, that, there'll be much more investment in this area as the awareness increases. And just, I'll quote one statistic from Austria that I came across recently in terms of there's the hundreds of enterprises. Actually, do you know what? I'll maybe post the report up in the chat because I don't have the exact figures to hand. But what they did was they quantified the number of enterprises, the number of turnover, and the number of jobs created in this sector. And I think that's the kind of figures and the kind of research we need to have to help policymakers in this sector and put more concrete actions in place. I don't know, Stuart, or from the UK, or Agnieszka from Poznan, if you have got any comments on that. Do you think there's enough specific supports for this sector? Who wants to go first? Stu?
Shall I go? Okay. I think possibly a similar experience to Stina. It's quite a rapidly changing sector. There's lots of incubation support around clean tech, sustainability approaches. Nature-based enterprises is very much emerging. I think we've seen a real change from when we first put the application in to where we are now. When we first put the application in, there was definitely a feeling that perhaps the awareness wasn't there. So we blended nature-based enterprises and resource efficiency. Thinking that maybe if we just went for nature-based enterprises, that the awareness amongst the funders wouldn't necessarily be be there. Now, I don't think that's the case. I very much think you could push that kind of agenda. And we have more and more kind of opportunities emerging. I think there's a funding call tomorrow, which is a DEFRA Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, which is very much this kind of process, looking at kind of economic models around nature-based solutions and nature-based enterprises. So yeah, it's changing, but we've seen a real change in the lifetime of the project.
No, I mean, even I remember when we were talking about nature-based solutions in the tourist project 5 years ago, it was a new term and people didn't know what nature-based solutions were, let alone nature-based enterprises. So it's amazing how quickly that has changed and how much uptake of this terminology we're seeing in policy documents, and then from that in actual support programs. So have Poznan and Poland come out and declared their support for this sector yet, Agnieszka?
For sure, I see the crucial role of municipality, but also the EU programs. And again, municipality to use the EU programs for giving kind of seed money or mentorship for NB, and promote this participatory approach, which is characteristic for NBSs, for implementing in the cities. So yes, we have a lot to do for next years. A lot of possible new tasks to undertake as a municipalities.
Great, and I know that we're working together with our cities and Connecting Nature on implementing these kinds of support strategies. And that reminds me, we have a guidebook for cities on our website on putting in place this kind of strategy to support and stimulate nature-based entrepreneurship. One of the questions which has come up a couple of times now in the chat is about the kind of success rates of startups, because I think we all know that a large number of tech startups fail. Do we have statistics yet for this sector? My thinking is because really we're the only ones doing research in this area, I think, directly on nature-based enterprises, and we've come up with the typology. I would be very surprised if there were, reports already on this. But I know it is something that we're looking at in our own research. But I'd be really interested in finding out, maybe Colm, you've probably, and Stina, you're both really well established. Did you collect statistics in terms of market failures or successes?
Yeah, no, the market fit. As we were doing the programs, yes. Whether there's this kind of data and information is already. I mean, there are some things coming out now, but certainly when we started off, there was very little nature-based enterprises. So it's like you said. I think the people who are working on it are maybe us and maybe some other few specifically on nature-based enterprises speaking about failures. Yeah, going back to maybe something I said earlier, and it's related as well to, I suppose, the funding gap specifically, and also mentioned there when it comes to impact investing. We speak about in our program nature-based enterprises, they must have an impact, and I find especially to get the kind of interest from the impact investor that you want for them to select the model for the program. What we've seen is that European startups they tend to fail a little bit more, and that's not very promising. But they tend to fail a little bit more than US or for example, we're also focusing in our first program. We focused as well in Africa and in South America. And why this happens? Well, certainly why it happened in our programs, and we're also studying those models. It happened, I guess, because there was many of these startups had second or sometimes even third jobs. So the startup wasn't their enterprise wasn't the focus of the main focus of their activity. And I think that this is a very important lesson. And networks, we spoke about networks as well. But that's I think a more minor issue when we speak about European really, when you want to, if you really want to get out of the valley of death, as you mentioned before, you really have to give it your whole, and you can't be doing 2 or 3 other jobs. I mean, if you're bootstrapping, I suppose you do have, the money has to be something coming from somewhere. But there is that stage where you just have to throw yourself into it. And European startups tend to have multiple activities going on, is what we've found.
Okay, thanks. Unfortunately, I think we're running out of time, and I can see quite a few interesting questions coming through in terms of technology, which I'm sure, Sunil, you'd love to answer, in terms also of, how to ensure that it's and how to make green space more accessible. The one that I would like to finish with very briefly is there was a comment, and it's related to the question of startups and financing. Have any of you, has this generation of impressive NBE incubators learned from the experience of social impact incubators which have emerged over the last 15 years? And there's a specific example given there of the Impact Hub. Have you guys, when you were developing, looked at these impact incubator models and have been able to integrate any of the learning from that into your own models? I don't know if anybody wants to take that. Who'd like to start?
Yeah, I can answer in very briefly for what I know. I mean, the Impact Hub model is a franchise, and I've seen it pop up we've had partnerships in some African countries with the Impact Hub, and it's a very replicable model, and it's a brand. It's essentially a brand now, and a credible brand. So, if you get a startup or an enterprise that comes through, social enterprise that comes through, social business model that comes through an Impact Hub, it's a little bit more credible than maybe Impact Hub X with a different name from the same place. For nature is a little bit more difficult to sell, in the sense that it's also difficult to value. One of the things we do in Etifor is we try to value nature and its range of ecosystem services, but trying to sell that takes a little bit more effort. I think social and social impact sells more for impact investors, we've seen anyway. And I guess it's paradoxical in a sense, because you also need to think that the value of what I showed from the very first slide of the presentation, the value of what deforestation will have on the world is going to be incredible in coming years. Don't know if that answers it.
So it sounds like you have certainly taken some of those learnings into account. Stina, I might leave the last word with you, because I mean, you mentioned 300 startups which have gone through. From your own experience, have they been successful, and have you kind of looked at other social impact incubator models to kind of build your own business sustainably?
Yes, luckily we've seen MBEs and other entrepreneurs being successful, and the way we really see their successes is when they grow too big in human capacity, and we don't have enough space for them to be there. So that means that either they got funding or really success with their project, and they need to hire in more people. So that's a really good success to measure there. We also see that since Greencubator was founded in 2015, with some of the startups that was part of the Greencubator back then are still existing. So they passed the 5 years test. We don't have specific numbers on that regarding the NBEs that has been through Greencubator, but the community, especially around Copenhagen, is not that big, so we can follow the companies closely and see how they're raising money to extend or scale up their projects, and some of them also going international. So that's great to see.
always positive. It sounds like you need to collaborate with the university and get some student to track these 300 over time so that we have this kind of information. And it's certainly something we're researching at the moment. We're talking to a number of different enterprises about scaling up. But listen, we're coming to the end of our session, but it wouldn't be right to, we've heard from Denmark, we've heard from Italy, we've heard from London, we've heard from Poland. This time, not putting any pressure on you, Sean, but let's hear what's happening in Glasgow. And I have to say, I love, when Sean joined the project, who's very much in planning mode. And now we've thrown Sean at the deep end in terms of, have you thought about nature-based entrepreneurship in Glasgow, Sean, and what can you do to support it? So Sean, would you give us a little bit of, if you could wrap up this session by telling us a little bit about your journey and your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Siobhan. Yeah, it's fair to say that I'm at an early stage in my kind of nature-based enterprise journey, and I think we all are in Glasgow. So it's been great to hear from the other speakers there who are far more experienced, and it's good to see that there are some success stories there. So as well as being a host compare, I am actually a chartered urban planner as well, and I work in the Connected Nature project in Glasgow. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our plans around our nature-based enterprise strategies that we're developing in Glasgow. So first of all, why should we prepare a nature-based enterprise? Why should we prepare for nature-based enterprises? And I think we've heard quite a lot about that already today. So I'm briefly going to go through this slide. Basically, we can't really rely on the public sector, not in Scotland anyway. It's definitely, we're experiencing diminishing resources, and there are other priorities too. So that's a barrier that we have to try and overcome in some other way. Also, a thriving nature-based enterprise sector or nature-based economy allows us to develop far more environmentally and socially friendly businesses, helping to create more sustainable and productive communities whilst achieving our ambitious net zero targets. And also, now is the right time for us here in Europe and across the world, but definitely here in Scotland as well. The Scottish Government are now moving the national policy agenda, especially in relation to urban planning policy with the upcoming National Planning Framework 4, which was mentioned by the Cabinet Secretary the other day, but also with economic policy too, and the strengthening relationship between the Wellbeing Economic Alliance. So I think that the plan is that we need to strike whilst the iron is hot, and that's what we're trying to do here. So lastly, slide just skipped. Apologies about that. So lastly, and this relates to my first point, in Glasgow, for those of you who don't know, our Connected Nature Exemplar is the delivery plan mapping of the Council's open space strategy. We want to see Glasgow's open spaces used in the best way possible so that they provide water management, be suitable for children's play, improve habitat connections, and can be used by a whole range of people for multifunctional purposes. But all this requires maintenance and stewardship, which the public sector cannot achieve on its own. So we want to develop a robust local nature-based economy, including nature-based enterprises and organisations. So before I go on to talk about what we are doing in Glasgow, I want to give a few of some of the nature-based organisations already well established in the local area. And if anyone is here from any of these organisations, please do comment in the chat, especially if I get anything wrong. Okay, first up is ERTS. ERTS are a nature-based enterprise who use nature in an indirect way by providing landscape architectural services. What's great about ERTS is that they also get involved in community-based work too. And the picture you can see here is of a community garden in the east of Glasgow on vacant land, which is a big issue for the city, being post-industrial. Next is Green Roofs, who are also a nature-based enterprise, but they use nature in a direct way to create green roofs. They have a broad range of options, and this example is taken from the Wedge building in the Pollock area of Glasgow, which is being used for community purposes at the moment. And lastly, we have Urban Roots, who could probably be best described as a nature-based organisation because they run under a charity model. They're involved in so many nature-friendly projects across the city, and this is an image of an outdoor forest classroom, for example. So last slide, I just want to briefly introduce our plans in Glasgow. Well, the main part of our proposal is to develop a nature-based incubator, as you might have guessed. We're now at an advanced stage of development of a pilot program, so I'm just going to briefly go through the steps that we've taken so far to get to where we are. Step one was to ensure that we raised awareness about our open space strategy and ensure that our plans for a nature-based enterprise strategy aligned with our nature-based solution exemplar. So one of our main criteria for project ideas for this pilot is that they help to achieve the objectives of the open space strategy, especially with stewardship. Step two was to make sure we found the right partners to work with. We can't do it all by ourselves, and we recognise that we have to rely on other expertise to help us develop this idea. So we carried out a mapping exercise using a simple methodology, which allowed us to red, amber, green potential partners. And an important point here to note is that through this research, we discovered that actually there was no focused nature-based enterprise incubator or accelerator in Glasgow. Others were maybe doing it on the side, but not focused. So this is an area that's really new in Scotland and that we're getting involved with now. So at the same time, we have also built new relationships with colleagues at Glasgow City Council, and have also partnered up with Glasgow Centre for Civic Innovation, who have a focus on improving societal issues, which is a key thing for us. And also we've partnered up with the Melting Pot, who are an established business incubator already. So the final step has been to develop a customised support programme, basically the nature-based incubator. And to do this, we consulted with industry experts, and I'm pleased to say that we have a schedule agreed now and a first draft of the detailed programme. The pilot is expected to run for about 10 weeks and support hopefully between 3 and 5 nature-based enterprise or organisations. So it is small scale, but I guess you do have to start somewhere. We are aiming to open the application process in the last week of April with a start date of mid-May. So things are moving really fast. Thereafter, the plan is to learn from the pilot and launch a formal programme during the COP conference later in the autumn. So my advice at the moment is please do watch this space. There'll be more communication going out locally soon. So thanks everyone. Thanks Siobhan.
Thank you, Sean, and what a fitting way to end the session here today with those inspiring words. And it's really exciting to see this program being launched, and we're really looking forward to seeing many more nature-based enterprises from Glasgow. So look, we're bang on time. So it all remains for me to say is to very much thank our panel of speakers. Thanks Dina, thanks Stuart, thanks Colm, Agnieszka and Sean, and for this kind of whirlwind tour of incubators and nature-based enterprises across Europe. And a very special mention also to the 12 nature-based enterprises who featured in our video at the start. We wish them continued success. And if you're interested in finding out any more about them or joining any of our communities of practice filled with these enterprises and many more, please join us on the Nature-Based Enterprise platform. I'm sure you'll find all the information on the chat or in the Connecting Nature booth. Thank you so much, guys. Keep up the good work. We'll get there with the nature-based economy. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a